A wedding interrupted. The organ wheezed, a sickly counterpoint to the dread curdling in Mary Rose's stomach. Her gaze remained fixed on the worn planks of the church floor, avoiding the expectant eyes of the townsfolk, avoiding the fleshy bulk of Jebediah Stone waiting for her at the altar. The lace of her mother's repurposed wedding gown felt like a shroud. It smelled faintly of mothballs and broken dreams. Her hands, clasped tightly before her, trembled. She could feel the weight of the gold band Jebediah had forced upon her finger only yesterday, a symbol of the gilded cage he was offering. Security, he called it. A life free from want. But at what cost? The stifled air in the church pressed down on her, thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken disapproval. Even the perpetually optimistic Reverend Peabody seemed to be rushing through the opening remarks, a sheen of perspiration on his brow. Jebediah cleared his throat, the sound like gravel grinding. Mary Rose flinched. He reeked of whiskey and expensive cigars, a suffocating combination. He reached for her hand, his fingers thick and calloused. She allowed him to take it, her skin crawling at his touch. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Peabody droned, his voice echoing in the small space. Mary Rose squeezed her eyes shut. She imagined herself running, galloping away on her old mare, Betsy, the wind whipping through her hair, the taste of freedom on her tongue. A childish fantasy, she knew. There was nowhere to run. Jebediah's reach extended far beyond the dusty plains of redemption. If any person can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Mary Rose held her breath, a silent prayer escaping her lips. Please, let it be over soon. Just get it over with. Then, a deafening bang. The church doors splintered inward, showering the congregation with wood shards. Mary Rose gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Jebediah swore, his grip tightening on her hand, cutting off the circulation. Standing silhouetted in the doorway, sunlight blazing behind him, was Colton Granger. He held a smoking revolver aloft, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made Mary Rose's knees weak. He looked like a vengeful angel, a desert mirage, impossibly handsome and impossibly real. "This wedding," he declared, his voice ringing through the stunned silence, "is over." A collective gasp rippled through the church. Jebediah roared, his face turning a mottled purple. "Granger, you dare interrupt my wedding?" Colton ignored him, his gaze locked on Mary Rose. "Mary Rose," he said, his voice softening, "I'm here to take you home." Home. She hadn't felt like she had a home in years. Before she could speak, Jebediah lunged, knocking over the small table holding the wedding rings. Colton reacted instantly, firing another shot into the ceiling. Plastered dust rained down on the horrified faces of the wedding guests. "Anyone who tries to stop us," Colton warned, his voice hard and uncompromising, "will regret it." He holstered his revolver and strode purposefully towards the altar. He reached for Mary Rose's hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Come on," he murmured, his eyes pleading. She looked from Colton to Jebediah, whose face was contorted with rage, then to the terrified faces of her neighbors. Fear warred with a sudden, overwhelming sense of hope. Taking a deep breath, Mary Rose made her decision. She squeezed Colton's hand and pulled away from Jebediah. "Let's go," she whispered. Chaos erupted. Women screamed, men shouted, and Reverend Peabody fainted, collapsing in a heap behind the altar. Colton pulled Mary Rose through the crowd, dodging outstretched hands and angry shouts. Outside, his horse, a magnificent black stallion, was waiting. He lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. Jebediah burst out of the church, his face crimson with fury. "Get them!" he bellowed to the scattering townsfolk. Colton spurred the stallion into a gallop, the hooves pounding against the dusty ground. Mary Rose clung to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced back and saw a posse of men, led by Jebediah, mounting their horses and giving chase. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying away the scent of lilies and mothballs. For the first time in a long time, Mary Rose felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for: freedom. But she knew, with a chilling certainty, that their escape had only just begun. Jebediah Stone would not let her go easily. And a vast, unforgiving desert stretched before them, a dangerous and uncertain path. Across the desert, Dust Devil was a blur of tawny muscle, eating up the ground as they fled. Mary Rose clung to Colton's back, the wind whipping her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. The wedding dress, a confection of lace and pearls that had felt like a shroud only hours ago, now billowed behind them like a defiant banner. Behind them, she could hear the enraged shouts of Jebediah and his men, growing fainter with each passing moment. But she knew they wouldn't give up easily. Jebediah was not a man used to being denied. "Hold on tight," Colton yelled over the roar of the wind. He urged Dust Devil to an even greater speed, the horse's hooves drumming a frantic rhythm against the parched earth. The desert unfolded before them, a vast and unforgiving landscape of sun-baked rock, thorny scrub, and endless sand. The heat was already oppressive, even in the early morning, promising a day of blistering intensity. Mary Rose felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of riding and resting. Colton knew the desert well. He led them through rocky canyons and across shimmering salt flats, always keeping a wary eye on the horizon. He rationed their water carefully, offering Mary Rose small sips from his canteen. The relentless sun beat down on them, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Mary Rose's throat was parched, her skin burned. She could feel the fear gnawing at her, a constant companion. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant sound made her jump. "How much further?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Colton glanced at her, his eyes narrowed against the glare. "Not far. Just need to reach the canyon. There's a spring there and some shelter." She nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, that Jebediah's men were closing in. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they finally reached the canyon. It was a narrow gash in the earth, offering a welcome respite from the open desert. A small spring trickled down the rock face, creating a tiny oasis of green. Colton dismounted and helped Mary Rose down. Her legs felt wobbly, her body exhausted. She sank to the ground, grateful for the shade. He tended to Dust Devil first, watering him and checking his hooves. Then he filled their canteens and offered Mary Rose some dried meat. She took it, but her appetite was gone. She looked at Colton, his face weathered and resolute, and a wave of doubt washed over her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped chewing and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Doing what?" "Rescuing me. Risking your life. You barely know me." He hesitated, then looked away, towards the darkening sky. "Someone had to. But why you? Were you paid to do this?" He turned back to her, his jaw tight. "I wasn't paid. I did it because it was the right thing to do. You shouldn't have been forced into that marriage." Mary Rose studied him, searching for any hint of deception. But his eyes were steady, his gaze unwavering. She wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of being betrayed had made her wary. "And what happens now?" she asked. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere Jebediah can't reach you." He paused, his voice softening. "Somewhere you can start a new life. A hidden refuge." The sun, a merciless hammer, pounded the desert, each sand grain a tiny mirror intensifying the burn. Mary Rose tripped, the fragile silk of her wedding gown tangling in a thorny mesquite. Colton's steadying grip was immediate. Almost there, he rasped, his gaze sweeping the bleached landscape. Reaching a crest, he halted, a low whistle escaping him. Tucked against a hulking rock face, shielded by a knot of scrub oak, was a cave. Not a mere alcove, but a true mouth of darkness, promising respite from the sun's fury. "Think it's safe?" Mary Rose's voice was a dry rasp. Colton's shrug was noncommittal. "Safer than baking out here. We'll take a look." He drew his revolver, steel flashing in the glare, and advanced warily, Mary Rose shadowing him. The air within dropped several degrees, carrying the scent of cool loam mingled with an animal tang. Colton raised a hand, silencing her. He strained to hear. Nothing. He ventured further, boots scuffing on loose stone. The cave yawned into a small chamber, illuminated by a sunbeam piercing a hole in the ceiling. Empty. Looks clear, he announced, reholstering his weapon. We can rest. Mary Rose sank down, relishing the cool earth against her skin. She tugged at the suffocating silk, yearning to shed the outward symbol of her near imprisonment. Colton watched her face a study in neutrality. He turned to the task of gathering fallen branches and tinder near the entrance. For a fire later, he offered. As dusk painted the sky in strokes of vibrant coral and violet, Colton coaxed a small fire to life in the chamber center. The flames flickered, throwing dancing silhouettes on the rough walls. He offered Mary Rose a canteen. Water's getting scarce, he said. We'll need to locate a spring soon. She drank deeply, the liquid a temporary balm. Then, her gaze found Colton's, his features etched in firelight. Why did you do it? She asked, her tone soft. Why save me? He avoided her eyes, nudging the fire with a twig. Didn't sit right, he muttered. No woman should be forced like that. Mary Rose pressed him. But you risked everything. You didn't even know me. Finally, he met her gaze, his blue eyes direct. Maybe I saw something in you worth saving, he admitted quietly. A beat passed. Besides, bucking the system ain't exactly new to me. Pa always said I had a nose for trouble. He leaned back against the cave wall, a touch of melancholy in his expression. He'd spin yarns, mostly bluster about renegades and heroes, folks who stood tall for what was right, come what may. Guess some of it stuck. He shared stories of his youth, taming wild mustangs, grueling cattle drives, and the time he'd challenged a corrupt lawman preying on farmers. He spoke of family, a brother lost too young, a mother worn thin by life. Mary Rose listened, enthralled, glimpsing a hidden dimension to the taciturn cowboy who'd become her savior. Later, as the fire faded to glowing embers, Colton retrieved his rifle. Time you learned this, he declared, passing it to her. Mary Rose stared at the weapon, her hand unsteady. I can't, she whispered. I've never held one. You have to, Colton insisted, his voice firm. They'll be coming, and you need to defend yourself. He patiently demonstrated loading, aiming, bracing for the kick. His tone was calm, reassuring. Mary Rose proved a quick learner, her fear slowly yielding to resolve. He propped up a makeshift target against the wall, a piece of bark crudely marked with a circle. All right, he instructed. Aim. Mary Rose inhaled deeply, her hand still trembling slightly. She lined up the sights, focusing on the target. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle jolted against her shoulder, the blast echoing in the confined space. The shot veered wide, chipping rock beside the bark. Again, Colton prompted. She fired again, and again, each attempt drawing her closer to the mark. By the time the moon claimed the sky, Mary Rose was hitting the target with surprising regularity. A faint smile touched her lips. She handed back the rifle. I think I'm figuring it out, she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. Colton nodded, a flicker of pride in his gaze. You are, he affirmed. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within him, that Mary Rose Bellwether possessed a strength she had yet to fully realize, and she would need every bit of it to survive what lay ahead. Canyon escape. The dust devils danced a frantic jig on the horizon, mocking their desperate flight. Cole, his jaw tight, squinted. Riders. 5, maybe 6. Coming fast. Mary Rose, her breath catching in her throat, scanned the barren landscape. Until this moment, she'd been numb, running on adrenaline and Cole's unwavering determination. Now, the reality of their situation slammed into her. Jebediah wasn't going to let her go. The canyon, Cole said, urging his horse, Diablo, forward. It's our only chance. The canyon was a jagged scar in the earth, barely wider than Diablo's flanks. Jagged rocks jutted out like broken teeth, and the air hung thick and still, baking the sandstone walls. Cole spurred Diablo into the narrow opening, Mary Rose following close behind on a borrowed mare, a nervous flutter in her stomach. "Hold on tight," Cole yelled over the clatter of hooves against stone. The canyon walls rose around them, blotting out the sun, turning the world into a claustrophobic tunnel of red and brown. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and something else. Something wild. Mary Rose gripped the reins, her knuckles white, as the mare stumbled over loose rocks. Behind them, the riders' shouts echoed, growing louder. She risked a glance back. They were gaining on them, their horses larger, stronger. Jebediah's men. Implacable. Suddenly, the canyon narrowed even further, forcing them into a single file. A low branch, sharp as a knife, whipped across Mary Rose's face, leaving a burning welt. She cried out, instinctively ducking. "Are you all right?" Cole shouted, his voice tight with concern. "Just go." She managed, pushing the fear down, willing herself to be strong. She couldn't be a burden. The canyon twisted and turned, a labyrinth of stone. Cole, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, navigated the treacherous path with an uncanny sense of direction. He seemed to know every dip and curve, every treacherous rock. Then disaster. A rock slide, triggered by the pounding hooves of Jebediah's men, sent a shower of stones cascading down the canyon walls. A large boulder crashed down in front of Mary Rose's mare, throwing the animal into a panicked frenzy. Mary Rose lost her grip, tumbling sideways onto the hard-packed earth. Pain shot through her arm. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the canyon walls. "Mary Rose!" Cole skidded Diablo to a halt, turning back towards her. But it was too late. Two of Jebediah's men rounded the bend, their faces grim, their rifles raised. "Cole, go!" Mary Rose shouted, struggling to her feet. "Save yourself." He hesitated for only a heartbeat, his eyes locked on hers, a silent battle raging within him. Then, with a fierce cry, he spurred Diablo forward, directly towards the riders. He fired his pistol, the shot echoing deafeningly in the confined space. The first rider, caught off guard, reared back his horse, creating a momentary distraction. Cole seized the opportunity, grabbing Mary Rose by the arm and hauling her onto Diablo behind him. "Hold on," he roared, and they were off again, the canyon blurring past in a dizzying rush. Behind them, the riders swore and gave chase, but the delay had given them a crucial head start. The canyon, their prison, was now their ally, its treacherous terrain slowing their pursuers. Finally, the canyon opened up into a wider valley, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. They had escaped for now, but Mary Rose knew, with a chilling certainty, that Jebediah wouldn't give up. This was just the beginning. Sandstorm embrace. The wind, a low growl all morning, suddenly shrieked. Mary Rose shielded her eyes, the fine grit already stinging her skin. One moment, they were riding across a relatively clear stretch of desert. The next, the horizon dissolved into a swirling ochre chaos. "Sandstorm!" Cole yelled, his voice barely audible above the rising gale. He reined in his horse, the animal skittish and fighting the bit. "We need cover now," Mary Rose's mare whinnied, rearing slightly. Fear constricted her throat. She'd heard tales of sandstorms, of travelers swallowed whole, their bones bleached white under the merciless sun. She clung to the reins, her knuckles white. Cole spurred his horse forward, grabbing her reins. "Hold on," he shouted, leading her towards a cluster of jagged rocks that jutted out of the sand like broken teeth. The wind buffeted them relentlessly, sand pelting them like tiny needles. They dismounted behind the largest rock, the meager shelter offering little protection from the onslaught. Mary Rose coughed, her lungs already burning. She pulled her shawl tighter around her face, but the sand found its way in, coating her teeth with a gritty film. Cole was already digging with his hands, scooping out a shallow depression in the lee of the rock. "Get down," he ordered, his face grim. "Make yourself as small as possible." They huddled together in the hollow, the wind roaring past them, a terrifying symphony of destruction. The air was thick with sand, visibility reduced to mere feet. The horses, tethered close by, whinnied nervously. Hours crawled by. The storm raged on, a relentless assault on their senses. Mary Rose shivered, not just from the cold, but from the sheer terror of being at the mercy of the elements. The shawl offered little warmth. She felt utterly vulnerable, exposed. Cole shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "Cold?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, unable to speak past the dryness in her throat. He didn't hesitate. He pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her, offering a small measure of warmth and protection. His body was solid and strong, a comforting presence in the swirling chaos. She leaned into him, seeking solace in his strength. It was the first time they had touched without purpose, without the urgency of escape. There was a different kind of urgency now, a quiet awareness that hummed between them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled by the shawl. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice low, his breath warm against her ear. "Just hold on." As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm brewed within them. The shared vulnerability, the enforced intimacy, sparked something new, something undeniable. Cole turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. His eyes, usually so sharp and focused, were softened by the dim light and the shared experience. She saw a flicker of something else there, something that made her heart skip a beat. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The simple gesture sent a shiver down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Mary Rose," he murmured, his voice husky. The storm howled around them, but in that moment, all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. The world outside faded away, and all that mattered was the warmth of his hand on her cheek, the intensity of his gaze, the unspoken question hanging in the air between them. She closed her eyes, and then, very gently, he lowered his head and kissed her. Esmeralda's wisdom. Heat shimmered above the cracked earth as they topped the final ridge. The sunset bleeding across the horizon in shades of violet and molten gold. Below, cradled in a shallow depression, lay Harmony Gulch. It wasn't so much a town as a scattering of ramshackle buildings fighting decay like tenacious weeds in arid soil. "Does anyone even live here?" Mary Rose croaked, her voice sandpapered by days of parched silence and unyielding travel. Cole narrowed his gaze, shielding his eyes. See smoke curling from a couple of chimneys. Not deserted, just forgotten. He nudged Dusty forward, the weary horse responding with a low groan. The stillness of Harmony Gulch pressed in on them, disturbed only by the creak of saddle leather and the muffled drum of hooves. A chorus of barks, echoing off empty buildings, greeted them as they passed boarded-up businesses and homes adorned with flaking paint. A skeletal swing set, one seat missing, stood guard before a dilapidated schoolhouse. They found the general store still open, a solitary lantern spilling amber light onto the dusty street. A faint chime announced their entrance, alerting the lone figure behind the counter. The woman was weathered and old, her face a tapestry of wrinkles woven by time and harsh sunlight. Yet, her eyes held a glint of shrewdness like polished jet. "Evening," she greeted them, her voice a low, resonant drawl. "Didn't figure to see new blood in these parts." "Just passing through," Cole replied, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Need supplies and a place to bed down for the night." The woman scrutinized them, her gaze lingering on Mary Rose's tattered dress and Cole's guarded stance. "Esmeralda's the name. In my spare room's the only lodging you'll find. It ain't the grandest, but it's dry and has a cot." They gratefully accepted. The room was small and simply furnished, but clean. Mary Rose collapsed onto the bed, the yielding surface a balm after days on the unforgiving ground. Later, over a meager supper of beans and hardtack, Esmeralda joined them on the porch, the cool evening air redolent with sage and dust. The moon, a silver disk, hung high in the dark expanse. "So," Esmeralda began, her eyes gleaming in the lunar glow, "running from the devil, are we?" Cole tensed, but Mary Rose, surprising him, spoke. From Jebediah Thorne. Esmeralda's expression remained unchanged, though a flicker, recognition, perhaps, briefly touched her features. Jebediah. His reach is long. He wants Mary Rose back, Cole stated, his voice tight with suppressed anger. He won't quit until he has her. Esmeralda gave a slow nod. A cold-blooded man, Jebediah. Power's his obsession. He brooks no defiance. Every trick, every falsehood, every underhanded scheme he can devise, he'll use to reclaim what he believes is his. We know, Mary Rose said, a tremor in her voice. He'll employ cutthroats, the sort who'd sell their souls for a fistful of coins. Men without honor. They'll be searching. You must be vigilant. Trust no one lightly. Esmeralda paused, her stare intense. Especially not where things appear too comforting. Cole's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Word travels on the wind in this land, Esmeralda revealed. Jebediah has spies everywhere. Places that offer aid too freely, where the welcome is suspiciously warm. Those are the snares you should avoid most. They may be expecting you. A shiver traced Mary Rose's spine, despite the mildness of the air. The prospect of being hunted, of never knowing safety, filled her with dread. Yet, seeing the resolute set of Cole's jaw, she discovered a spark of defiance within herself. She refused to let Jebediah triumph. She refused to be broken. Thank you, Esmeralda, Cole said, his tone earnest, for the warning. We will take heed. Esmeralda nodded, her gaze distant. Sometimes cruelty is the truest kindness, and sometimes faith is the deadliest weapon. She rose, her form a stark silhouette against the luminous sky. Rest now. You'll need it. Ambush and courage. The morning sun, a molten coin in the eastern sky, warmed Mary Rose's face as they rode. Colton set a brisk pace, Devil's hoofbeats drumming a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The air, crisp and clean, smelled of sagebrush and distant rain. She clutched the rifle Colton had insisted she take, its weight unfamiliar and strangely comforting in her hands. Almost there, Colton said, his voice a low rumble that the wind snatched away. Another hour should see us at Jed's ranch. She nodded, trying to memorize the landmarks Colton pointed out, a solitary Joshua tree-shaped like a supplicant, a wash carved deep into the earth by flash floods. Anything to keep her mind from dwelling on Jebediah and the inevitable pursuit. They rounded a bend in the trail, the land opening into a small, grassy meadow dotted with wildflowers. It was a deceptive piece. A volley of gunfire shattered the morning quiet. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust near Devil's hooves. The horse screamed, rearing back. Colton fought to control him, his face a mask of grim concentration. Ambush, he yelled, shoving Mary Rose off her horse and into the meager cover of a rock outcropping. Stay down. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Mary Rose's ears rang. She scrambled behind the rocks, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through a gap in the stone, she saw them. For men on horseback, faces hidden behind bandanas, firing relentlessly. Jebediah's men. Colton returned fire, his pistol barking, each shot precise and deadly. One of the riders cried out, clutching his arm, but they were outnumbered. Colton was exposed, using Devil as a shield while trying to keep them pinned down. Fear threatened to paralyze Mary Rose. She had never held a gun before, let alone fired one in anger. But looking at Colton, his jaw tight, his eyes focused, she knew she had to do something. She fumbled with the rifle, her fingers clumsy and shaking. Colton had shown her how to load it, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger. Now, she had to remember. Taking a deep breath, she rested the rifle on a rock, peering through the sights. One of the riders was circling around, trying to flank them. He was close, too close. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the sound deafening. The rider jerked, his hat flying off as he tumbled from his horse. The other riders paused, surprised. Colton glanced at her, his eyes widening in disbelief before hardening with determination. Good shot, he yelled, firing again. Keep bus. Emboldened, Mary Rose fired again and again. She wasn't aiming for anything specific, just trying to keep their heads down. The rifle became an extension of her arm, the recoil less frightening with each shot. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching herself from afar. The ambushers, unnerved by the unexpected resistance, began to retreat. They spurred their horses, disappearing back into the trees from which they came. Silence descended once more, broken only by the ragged breathing of Devil and the ringing in Mary Rose's ears. Colton slowly lowered his pistol, his gaze fixed on the spot where the riders had vanished. He turned to Mary Rose, his expression a mixture of relief and astonishment. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Mary Rose stared at the rifle in her hands, her fingers still trembling. She didn't know. It was as if something inside her had awakened, a dormant skill she never knew she possessed. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Colton holstered his pistol and walked towards her. He took the rifle from her hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. His eyes held a new respect, a newfound understanding. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "I reckon you're full of surprises, Mary Rose Bellwether." Showdown at the ranch. Dust devils danced across the plains as they crested the final ridge. Below, nestled in a shallow valley, lay the Bar W Ranch. It wasn't much, a scattering of sun-baked buildings clinging to the promise of water, but it was sanctuary. At least, they hoped it was. "That's Silas and Martha's place," Colton said, his voice tight with a mix of relief and apprehension. "They owe me a favor, and they ain't the sort to forget a debt." As they rode into the yard, a lean, weathered man emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. A woman with kind eyes and flour, dusting her apron, followed close behind. Silas squinted, then a slow grin spread across his face. "Cole Granger, you old son of a gun. And who might this be?" Colton dismounted, helping Mary Rose down. "This is Mary Rose, Silas. She needs our help. Jebediah Barlow is after her." Silas's grin vanished. He exchanged a grim look with Martha. "Barlow, eh? That's a whole heap of trouble you've brought with you, Cole." "I know, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Martha stepped forward, her gaze softening as she took in Mary Rose's pale face and trembling hands. "Come on inside, child. You look like you haven't eaten in days." The warmth of the kitchen was a balm to Mary Rose's chilled bones. While Martha bustled around, preparing a pot of stew, Silas and Colton huddled outside, their voices low and serious. Mary Rose strained to hear, anxiety twisting in her stomach. Later, fortified by the hearty meal, Colton outlined their plan. "Barlow will be here. It's just a matter of time. We need to be ready." Silas nodded, his eyes steely. "Got a few rifles stashed away, and I know these hills like the back of my hand. We can set up a decent defense." The afternoon was a blur of activity. Silas showed Colton the best vantage points, the natural cover, the places where an ambush could be laid. Martha, despite her initial reservations, proved surprisingly adept with a rifle. Mary Rose, still feeling out of place and useless, helped Martha load cartridges, her fingers clumsy and awkward. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the ranch, a tense silence descended. They were ready, or as ready as they could be. Colton positioned Mary Rose in the root cellar, the safest place on the property. "Stay here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No matter what happens, don't come out." He squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with a fierce determination that both frightened and reassured her. The first shots cracked the stillness of the night. They came from the north, a ragged volley that sent splinters flying from a barn. Colton, Silas, and Martha returned fire, the sound echoing across the valley. Mary Rose huddled in the darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs. The smell of damp earth and gunpowder filled her nostrils. Each gunshot was a hammer blow against her hope. She gripped a rusty shovel, the only weapon she could find, her knuckles white. The gunfire intensified, punctuated by shouts and the whinnying of horses. She could hear Colton's voice, sharp and commanding, directing their defense. Then, a new sound, the heavy thud of boots on the wooden porch. "Granger, come out with the woman, and we'll let your friends go." It was a voice she knew, cold and menacing. Jebediah Barlow. Mary Rose bit back a sob. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Colton and these good people die for her. She took a shaky breath and started to climb the cellar steps. Just as she reached the top, the cellar door burst open. Not Barlow, but Colton, his face grim, a bloody gash on his arm. "Get back," he yelled, shoving her roughly back down. "I told you to stay put." He slammed the door shut and disappeared back into the chaos. Mary Rose huddled in the darkness once more, the sound of the raging gunfight, a deafening symphony of fear. This was it, the final showdown, and she was trapped, helpless, as the storm raged around her. Freedom's horizon. The burlap sack, saturated with the acrid tang of old potatoes and raw terror, stole her breath. Mary Rose gagged, the scratchy weave of torment against her skin as callous hands hauled her along the gritty ground. Jebediah's vultures, circling their prey. Just when she dared to believe in sanctuary, tasted the faintest sweetness of liberty, they'd sprung their trap. Only dust and despair coated her tongue now. "Hush now, songbird," a gravelly voice croaked above. "Wouldn't want to bruise the merchandise before the altar." Tears, burning and futile, leaked into the stifling gloom. She lashed out, a feeble, muffled protest. Marriage to that beast? Never. Then, a detonation ripped through the air, a sound that hammered even through the coarse fabric. A bellow abruptly choked off. Another shot cracked, and another. The world lurched sickeningly. Shouts, the thud of collapsing weight. Like a fledgling taking its first flight, hope tentatively unfolded in her chest. The sack tore away. A painful blaze of sunlight seared her vision. Colton. He stood, a dark figure framed by the dawn, his Colt peacemaker still exhaling smoke. His face, etched with grim purpose, was a far cry from the gentle regard she'd known. "Get on the horse, Mary Rose," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent rumble. No hesitation. Stumbling upward, she flew to the waiting mare, her pulse a frantic drum solo against her ribs. Colton covered their escape, gunshots cleaving the air, scattering the remaining thugs like startled sparrows. They spurred the horse onward, the wind screaming past her ears, the frantic tattoo of hooves a desperate rhythm against the desert's vast stillness. She burrowed against Colton, his solid presence a haven against the fear threatening to engulf her. They reached the canyon as twilight painted the cliffs in shades of blood orange and bruised violet. A fortress of stone, sculpted by eons of wind and rain. Colton dismounted, his gaze sweeping the towering heights. "We hold here," he stated, jaw tight with resolve. He didn't need to name their adversary. Jebediah. He wouldn't relinquish her without a fight. The sun sank, casting long, predatory shadows across the canyon floor. Only the mournful cry of a distant coyote and the snap and hiss of Colton's fire disturbed the uneasy peace. "He'll be here," Mary Rose breathed, her voice thin. Colton nodded, his gaze unwavering and dark. "He will, but he'll have to crawl over me." He checked his weapon, movements honed by practice and intent. He was prepared. Still, she knew this was more than just about her. It was about the avarice, the tyranny, the cold-blooded cruelty that had festered in this land under Jebediah's reign. They weren't made to wait long. The earth trembled beneath the pounding hooves, the sound amplifying with each passing heartbeat. Jebediah and his brigands. Colton shoved her behind a hulking boulder. "Stay put. No sound. You hear?" She nodded, her throat constricted with dread. The ensuing clash was swift, savage. Gunfire tore through the air, ricocheting off the stone walls. Colton moved with an uncanny grace, weaving through the lead storm, his own shots finding their mark with ruthless efficiency. She glimpsed Jebediah, a monstrous shape astride his warhorse, his features twisted into a mask of furious hatred. Then silence. The echoes faded. Dust motes danced in the still air. Colton materialized from the dissipating smoke, his face smudged with grime and streaked with sweat. He favored one leg, but his eyes were steady. "It's finished," he rasped, voice raw. "He's gone." She didn't inquire how. There was no need. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around him, burying her face in the rough fabric of his coat. He returned the embrace, his grip a silent reassurance. They mounted the mare, leaving the battlefield behind. The nascent dawn painted the eastern sky with strokes of rose and gold. A clean slate, a fresh start. They rode westward, toward the setting sun, toward the promise of liberation. The past, a heavy anchor, was finally cut loose. The future, uncertain yet brimming with possibility, stretched before them. She glanced at Colton, his silhouette strong and unyielding against the vibrant canvas of the sky. A profound sense of security settled within her, bone deep and unwavering. She was safe at last. She was home.